Hafide and buenas. I'm now calling this public hearing to order, and the time now is 9:03 p.m., Friday, June 26, 2026. This hearing is conducted by myself, Senator Telo Taitague, Chairwoman on the Committee on Economic Investment, Military Buildup, Regional Relations, Technology, Regulatory Affairs, Justice, Election, and Retirement. Notice of this hearing was also disseminated to all senators and media via email and is made available on the Guam Legislature's website and the Government of Guam public notice portal. I'd like to recognize those who are here in person. Thank you so much for being here. And those, of course, watching from home. Welcome to the People's House. I would also like to welcome my colleague, Senator Chris Barnett, who is a member of the Committee on Military Buildup. As well, Senator, as you know, that the Google Drive has been sent out and all information has been disseminated to you also via email. Now, for the listening public, you can access the Google Drive link on the public hearing notices published on the Government of Guam public notice portal at notices.guam.gov. or the Guam Legislature's website at guamlegislature.gov. If you need any assistance, please feel free to call the legislature at 671-472-3465. Before again, we're going to set some rules of engagement. When you speak, please speak directly into the microphone. And for those who are testifying for the record, please state your name, position, and who you represent. I ask that those who are testifying today to stay seated for any questions my colleagues may have, and then you'll be excused. However, if you need to leave earlier, please let me know so that I can let you go first when any questions from my colleagues. And I respectfully ask that we conduct ourselves professionally and respect each other's opinion. And those who do not will comply to these rules will be removed from the room and prohibited from participation. Okay, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start this off. Again, welcome to part 2 of this military buildup defense informational briefing. Part 1 was held on May 4th, 2026, and testimony was heard from Guam Homeland Security and the Office of Civil Defense, Guam National Guard, the Office of the Governor on the progression of the military buildup and Guam's current defense capabilities and emergency response infrastructure. In the time that has passed, the status of Guam's military buildup has changed drastically. Through our research, we have found an article from the Washington Times reporting a budget request of $122 billion was sent to Congress from Admiral Sam Papar, commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. If approved, $67.4 billion will be allocated for new missiles and $18 billion to counter Chinese military control systems, $15 billion for a space-based missile warning system and battlefield surveillance sensor, and $2.3 billion for maritime, underwater, and ground-based drone weapons. However, only $909 million, that is, of this total budget request will be dedicated to Guam's defense system as part of the $4.5 billion Pacific Homeland Defense Strategy Program. According to the Washington Times, this report also disclosed the Pentagon's intention to deploy offensive missiles here to Guam, otherwise known as strike missiles. Additionally, the potential deployment of micronuclear reactors to Guam by 2030 is becoming more likely with an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027 being decided right now upon Congress as we speak. Should the buildup further intensify and extend after the approval of the Pentagon's new budget request, we will see significant intensification and potential extension of the military projects that will further impact and complicate the challenges our people are already facing with this buildup, ranging from already strained utility grids, housing, and rental market environment and culture preservation. Today, we will be hearing from the public and will allow testimony to be submitted even after this hearing, up to 5 days. At this time, I'd now like to open the floor to our public and allow, here is Honorable former Congressman Dr. Underwood, and you will be the first to begin. You are now recognized, sir, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Senator Taitague and Senator Barnett, and all the others senators who hopefully are watching on TV or will watch a taping of this hearing. I am Robert Underwood, and in this hearing today, I am here in my role as chair of the Pacific Center for Island Security. Sidus Maasi for holding this hearing and for giving various voices in our Guahan community the opportunity to express themselves and their concerns about dramatic changes in our society, economy, and political structure, such as those that you have just outlined in the past few weeks, Senator Taitague. My colleague at PCIS, Leland Bettis, will provide a statement on the dynamics of military activity in Guahan and the surrounding region. The PCIS presentation represents our best effort to outline the situation we face in Guahan with respect to the U.S. military plans and activities. I am frequently asked if PCIS is pro-military or anti-military. This is a false dichotomy that has unfortunately affected public discussion and policy making in our island home for decades. It seems to presuppose that the military and its activities is the standard of measurement against whether we ascertain whether something is good for us or not. It is time to use a new standard, which is people-based and Guam-based. The military has an important mission. I respect that mission, but they are not entitled to uncritical review or support for their activities. The most appropriate question is this activity positive or negative for Guam? That is a question you should be actively and enthusiastically asking and answering. If you want to ask the broader question of whether these military activities really promote peace and stability in Guam and the region, or actually takes us to a more precarious situation, then you can ask that as well. But that's a very complicated and nuanced question. But if Guam is being used as a platform for major power projection and geostrategic conflict, the home of offensive weapons, it is an entirely appropriate question for the people who live here. Perhaps it is a question that the people of this island and the surrounding region are the most entitled to ask and respond to in a critical manner. It is in that vein which PCIS seeks to expand the conversation. I believe that it is the Guam legislature responsibility, as it is the governor's and the delegates' responsibility, to ask critical questions and take countermeasures when necessary. Even though sometimes we say that, well, there's nothing we can do, just resign ourselves to whatever decision is being made, the unincorporated territory of Guahan still has the capacity to make laws which affect military activities, if not negate them. The governor of Guam can agree to be a handmaiden to military activities or seek to establish a more balanced relationship. The delegate can affect legislative initiatives at the federal level which benefit Guahan or perhaps reduce our capacity to respond. PCIS seeks to provide critical information as well as critical perspectives, not just for their own sake, Rather, we seek to expand the debate, extend the conversation, and most importantly, empower local communities. Thank you. And
Sujus Masi. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Bettis.
Hafaday, Madam Chair and Senator Barnett. I'm Leland Bettis, a member of the Board of Directors of the Pacific Center for Island Security, and I'm a resident of Aganya. I'm here today to provide foundational framing on the issues that this committee has been addressing: housing, labor, civil military affairs, education, infrastructure, healthcare, environmental concerns. All these issues arise from the application of an increasingly unbalanced and erratic view of Guam by the U.S. military. None of these are new issues. It's not like they haven't been raised for decades. Unfortunately, these issues central to our lives in Guam have not been addressed, and the situation seems to be getting worse. It is painfully clear that the current track of coordinating with the military locally is simply not working. Let me quickly offer some explanation for why things are increasingly off the rails and some broad suggestions on getting Guam back on track. First, it's important to recognize Guam is not a part of any U.S. national strategies. For all of the escalating activity that is going on in our part of the world, Guam is not in the U.S. national security strategy, not in the national defense strategy. We are not a part of any national economic strategy, and clearly the U.S. political strategy for Guam supports the continuation of the colonial status quo. Without guidance that places Guam in a national strategy or national policy framework, what the U.S. does in Guam and is doing in Guam is left to the operators and programs and other instruments of the U.S. government. Let me give you one example. In the security space, there is all this frenetic activity about militarization because of China's growing capabilities. On the other hand, there's a complete absence of civilian shelters and civilian resiliency in the event of a conflict. There's not a plan or a study to plan for a plan for shelters. Sure, we are important for military purposes, just not important in a national plan that thinks about civilian lives. Secondly, U.S. national priorities have been outsourced to the military. Even if Guam does not rate a place in national strategies that provide a focus on local conditions, there are clear national priorities at play. Billions of dollars are being channeled to Guam, and most of this is being managed to address U.S. military objectives. But billions of dollars do not a strategy make. It is critical to note that the billions for Guam is largely for the military. It is not a program for the Guam community. In the broadest sense, as the military correctly claims, they are working to defend U.S. soil, and by some tortured extension, that might be seen as serving the local community. But military personnel follow the billions. Where are the plans for housing military personnel? With the billions flow requirements for local labor. Where's the rationalization of how we as a community address both our human capital and development requirements and those of a transitory military requirement? How do we compete with a two-tiered wage structure that billions in federal projects brings? The evidence is clear. The billions for the military does not mean civilian needs are addressed. This hearing and the litany of long-standing, unresolved issues that negatively impact our lives is proof enough. Now, there's going to be some knock-on financial aspects to military activity. We're going to hear about EACs, and that funding will flow from the build-up process. But at the end of the day, even these funds are intended to serve first a military and second a civilian purpose. Against the backdrop of escalating housing and rental prices, a disrupted local labor market, healthcare challenges, and strained infrastructure, crumbs from our own table is what we're expected to be grateful for? Our priorities in Guam need to be weighed fairly in the balance. A third issue that drives what's going on is that military priorities change, and they change all the time. There needs to be a recognition that what is said today, what is happening today, and what happened in the past are not indicators of the future. Because there is no strategy for Guam, military or civilian, the military regards Guam as a utility piece which can be used even for suboptimal or non-continuous military purposes. I could provide you a long list. but just to mention a couple of current ones. Camp Laz. After massive environmental degradation, is this a facility the U.S. Marine Corps is actually going to occupy? The fact is the Marines never wanted to be here, but Japan put up the money and Guam paid the price. Now that it's built, at some point, maybe someone in the military will define a new requirement, or maybe not. Virginia-class submarine base at Polaris Point. The plans for developing Polaris Point to base new Virginia-class subs was the rage 3 years ago. A multi-billion-dollar plan was in the works. Not anymore. While there will be upgrades to support the existing complement of Los Angeles-class subs who will probably be here for another 5 to 8 years, a base, and all the projected follow-on ship repair-related work will not be staying in Guam. Don't count on ship repair work in Guam. But we've already been at this junction, and by now, we should know better. Let me give you a third point. Just a few years ago, just 3 years ago, when pressed on the complexities of layering offensive missiles on top of the quote-unquote missile defense system, the Joint Region Marianas spokesperson said, and I quote, "According to the Missile Defense Agency, the current architecture is not designed for offensive purposes. The current architecture does not support ground-based offensive ballistic or hypersonic missiles." Again, things change all the time, and you can count on that to happen in the future. The fourth item is about Guam's military value, and this is really critical to understanding where we're headed. Guam is moving from, and has moved from being a strategic sanctuary to strategic vulnerability. If you want to understand how the military thinks about Guam today, it is critical to appreciate that we are no longer seen as a sanctuary. Our vulnerability is now a defining characteristic. There was a time when the U.S. could operate from Guam without fear of an attack from an adversary. Those days are long gone. Of course, Guam remains incredibly important to the military. Andersen Air Force Base has the largest munition storage and fuels capacity of any U.S. Air Force base in the world. The Navy's ammunition annex at Fenna contains a crucial forward stockpile. But today, these assets are beset with acute vulnerabilities. And let me just speak to the vulnerabilities in several points. There is a reason that there are no permanently stationed manned U.S. Air Force bombers, tankers, or ISR planes at Andersen Air Force Base. There is a reason that the military is developing divert fields up the Marianas Chain and down to Yap and Palau. There is a reason that the planned development of the submarine base at Polaris Point has now moved to Western Australia. There is a reason the military wants an enhanced integrated air and missile defense system in Guam. And just to tip the scales on the vulnerability index, the head of U.S. Pacific Command now says Guam should have offensive missiles capable of reaching China. Going forward, the military's focus on Guam will be dominated by an incredible dependency that they have in operating freely here, balanced by the acute vulnerability to all of their operations. Not to dismiss the real challenges that a military operator or a warfighter has, but their focus on these issues will make our needs seem even less relevant than they are regarded today. And to put a fine point on where we are in this situation, even though the military is laser focused on their vulnerabilities, they can't even figure out a way to find room for civilian shelters and civilian support. Thinking about a way forward, I think, coming to terms with the unfortunate reality that we find ourselves in should be a call to action. If our community is to be sustainable, we cannot bear the weight of every military requirement today, much less a requirement that might change or is obsolete even before it is realized. Fundamentally, we need to recognize that a military plan for Guam and our future may not always be in sync. Indeed, civilian and military interests may frequently be out of sync, and this will likely increase given Guam's strategic vulnerability. Of course, the military has come to depend on Guam's acquiescence to any and all of its expressed needs. This has brought us a generation of crises around housing, healthcare, education, the labor market, the environment, etc. The individual issues that this committee has discussed need solutions. More empty words will not solve them. More missiles will not solve them. and we should not have to wait on a structural solution to address them. Small tactical steps and wins are needed now, but this means focus. It also means facing up to the reality that these issues will not work themselves out on their own. We can't just wish them away. Clearly, Guam needs to figure in national strategy. We cannot depend on Joint Task Force Micro or U.S. Pacific Command to carry these issues for us. They are too busy and will soon be even more busy addressing their growing vulnerabilities in Guam and the region. We cannot depend on formal discussion with local commands to solve these problems. Our current experience is evident enough that this is not a path to success. If the future of Guam's families for housing, shelter, education, safe infrastructure, and a livable environment are going to be achieved, we're going to have to carry this requirement ourselves. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Leland. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Baltazar again. Please proceed.
Hafaday, Madam Chair and Senator Barnett. For the record, my name is Baltazar Berdalio Uggan, and I'm here today to talk about the total collapse of the One Guam framework and the systemic disrespect of our people. I remember the empty chairs from the previous briefing last month. The top brass of the military command didn't miss that meeting because of a scheduling conflict. They ignored us. They are absent because, in the grand calculus of the war machine, our local government and our residents are treated as nuisances to be managed, not partners to be consulted. They think our voices and our consent mean nothing. Look at the news from Washington over the last few days. The House and Senate are moving forward massive defense proposals under fiscal year 2027 defense budget, carrying over $1.5 billion for the Guam buildup. We saw headlines celebrating a House amendment to zero out the $29 million requested for land acquisitions at Camp Blas and Nimitz Hill. But that potential land grab did not die. The Senate Armed Services Committee has put that exact same $29 million appropriation right back on the table. The threat to our civilian footprint is active, live, and moving through Congress. And the Pentagon is still moving full speed ahead with a multi-billion-dollar missile defense shield that turns our entire island into a combat laboratory. They are deploying land-based Aegis components right over Northwest Field at Andersen Air Force Base. They are packing the Navy munitions site with heavy launchers. And right in the middle of our island, the 6 communication domes at the Barragata Army Reserve property stand as a permanent, glowing bullseye for regional adversaries. The Marine Corps recently altered its internal strategic blueprint to keep its primary combat regiments in Okinawa. If the Pentagon can casually break a binding defense treaty with Japan, a sovereign nation, and unilaterally decide to leave those Marines in place, what do you think they will do to a U.S. territory? They will do whatever they want. They leave us with the permanent concrete, the destroyed jungle, and the operational risk, while turning our actual troop numbers into a shell game of 6-month rotations that threaten our Section 30 funding. Because history has shown that the U.S. war machine will take the land, poison the resources, ignore the locals, and call it global stability. Military planners say these installations and the transportable micronuclear reactors they want to bring into the Pacific Command area of responsibility to power them carry low environmental risk. But our bodies and our soil remember the truth. Today, Andersen Air Force Base remains a toxic Superfund site, as it has been since 1992. With over 80 hazardous zones leaching into the northern Guam Lens aquifer, the very water that 70% of our civilian population relies on to survive. And it isn't just Andersen. When you look across our landscape at the other 12 major toxic and defense restoration sites, from the toxic Agent Orange footprints left behind in Marlborough and Harmon, to the asbestos and Tizen, to the heavy metals in our bays, the pattern of environmental neglect is undeniable. While our island is still carrying the burden of, why is our island still carrying the burden of this massive toxic legacy? Look what happened in 2002. A landmark GAO report came out and exposed that the federal government funded a measly 4% of military cleanups on Guam compared to the rest of the nation. The Army Corps of Engineers explicitly admitted to moving our cleanups down the national priority list. They looked at our island and chose to rank us lower, despite acknowledging that the contamination posed an identical threat to human health. They decided that mainland communities were the priority, and we were not. They decided mainland lives were worth the funding, and ours weren't. As recently as 2023, our families in Malesa were paying the price for that exact deprioritization with documented spikes in cancer rates, directly linked to unmitigated military PCB contamination at Cocos Island. And now they want to introduce transportable nuclear microreactors into our region, exploiting a loophole in the federal defense bill that fast-tracks the evaluation of these programs without real civilian oversight. As Dr. Robert Underwood and Leland Bettis of the Pacific Center for Island Security recently warned our community, these installations don't deter war, they invite one. They turn our home into an immediate target. Under military, I believe Dr. Underwood said a double target. Under military doctrine, a power source feeding a missile shield is a critical node. It is a primary target for an enemy strike. In today's Guam Daily Post, Director Bettis explicitly warns that the Senate is demanding a backup command center before the primary one is even built. Federal planners are operating under the underlying assumption that Guam will be hit and rendered completely unavailable. If a reactor is targeted in a conflict or malfunctions, radiation will not stop at a base fence. A plume will cover our northern villages in minutes. Radioactive runoff will poison our aquifer in days. On an island 30 miles long, there is no inland to evacuate to. This is an existential threat to our survival. Several days ago in Washington, Hawaii Congresswoman Jill Tukuda stood up at the defense bill markup and gave a fiery speech against these exact same micronuclear reactors. She explicitly warned that after decades of nuclear testing in the Pacific and the poisoning of Oahu's water at Red Hill, the Hawaiian Islands refused to be used as a testing ground for an unproven military nuclear program. She rose in defense of her people and drew a line. As leaders in Hawaii have the courage to say no to being a nuclear experiment, I know this 38th Guam legislature has that same courage. You have already proven it. When you stood firm and passed Bill 25338 to ban deep-sea mining vessels from using our ports, now Public Law 38129, you protected our ocean and showed the entire region what visionary protective leadership looks like. You proved you have the statutory power to protect our home from outside exploitation. You drew an unyielding line at the reef, and the world listened. We must draw that same line, excuse me, on our soil. I urge this body to look at the precedent you set in protecting our ocean and apply it to our survival. Don't negotiate or regulate a nuclear loophole behind closed doors. Put it to the people. I urge this legislature to immediately introduce a legislative submission bill to place a binding referendum on the November general election ballot. Let the people of Guam decide, once and for all, if we will permit nuclear technology on our sacred island. In demanding this vote, we are simply standing up for what any other community who cares for its people and homeland would fight for. If federal authorities refuse to give us transparency, let us use the ultimate tool of democracy to give them our answer. Sizuas and Sainamasi.
Thank you so much, Baltazar. And at this time, before I get to Maneka, and Baltazar, can I please get your copy of your testimony emailed to me? If you don't have a hard copy with you today, yes. Please email it to my office at senatortelot@gmail.com. It was a very good testimony.
Yes, Senator, I will.
Before I turn it over to Maneka, is there anyone else in the audience who would like to come forward and have any comments or testify or any comments, really? It's not so much... Anyone else? Okay. But if you change your mind, just let my staff know, okay? And at this time, I'd like to recognize, and I believe we do have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so we're going to make sure that is ready to go. Okay, we're ready to go. Maneka, you are now recognized.
Cesar Masi, thank you so much, Senator Taitague and Senator Barnett, for being here. We wish more senators were here. It is an election year, and we've been hearing a lot of the senators and candidates talk about how they prioritize environmental issues and preservation, and not seeing people here living up to what they're saying in their campaign is really revealing. We also really appreciate you hosting today's forum in the middle of Valiant Shield. A lot of us have been overwhelmed with the noise pollution from Valiant Shield. There's ospreys here. A few of us had ospreys flying over our homes. Some of us feel like we can't even breathe. The sound is so powerful that it vibrates our insides of our bodies. And for those of us living in the area of Mongmong Totomaiti, we can even smell the fumes coming from the airport. And Valiant Shield always lines up with the Rim of the Pacific exercises, which is the world's largest military maritime exercise with over 30 participating countries. And so we are really in the midst of huge war games, which are truly provocations for conflict and tensions in the region. And part of what feeds into the buildup that's making us more of a target for war. Last year, a lot of us were at the Defense Forum held at the Dusitani, and it was really grating to hear a lot of the presenters repeat over and over again the words homeland and mainland, and trying to force a connection between our island as both part of the homeland, which is several thousand miles away, and also trying to deflect from where our mainland really is. Our homeland is here in the Marianas. And so, I'm here, I'm a member of Preparedness Guam, and a lot of our work is about democratizing information to help sustain and nurture community advocacy. And so a lot of our work includes toolkits on various comment periods and projects of the military, workshops for developing comments letter campaigns, of course, protests and community meetings, because our folks are also inundated not just with war games, but with comment period after comment period after comment period on really destructive projects. These very dense, heavy materials, we're burdened with thousands of pages of material to read and understand in such a short period of time, to participate in a process that doesn't always respond to our concerns and our priorities. And just even looking at a map of where we are, being the second island chain, and seeing how the island chains are lining up, how far away our island is from the quote-unquote mainland, it really is so frustrating to see how all of the Pacific is being set up as stages of war and sites of U.S. force projection, all for the benefit and the priorities of the United States. And so, with that, I just wanted to maybe also mention a little bit about greenwashing. I come here a lot and I talk about greenwashing. But greenwashing is the act or practice of making a product, policy, or activity appear to be more environmentally friendly or less environmentally harmful than it really is. And we've been inundated as well with federal and military greenwashing, trying to sort of dismiss our concerns about the impacts Greenwashing is also a pattern of behavior or manipulation that makes people believe that an agency is doing more to protect the environment than it really is. It uses false or misleading statements about the environmental benefits of a practice. And an example of this is how the Navy uses the words stewards of the sea to conceal how they kill, harm, harass, injure, contaminate, and destroy our ecosystem. The Navy refers to itself as a world leader in marine species research, stating they have funded many studies in the Marianas for us to better understand the distribution, abundance, habitat, and movement patterns of ocean species. Meanwhile, the Navy is using these studies as a mode to expand its harmful practices in our waters, which will ultimately increase stressors for marine life. And stressors are introduced into the environment by military activities and vary in intensity, frequency, duration, and location. And these include acoustics, explosives, sonar, physical disturbances, strikes, energy, entanglement, ingestion. Secondary as habit or prey availability is affected. And so I bring that up because, you know, we're inundated with a lot of the ways that, you know, the military does all these projects, but also tries to convince us that they're not harming us at the same time. And now, you know, we just finished the comment period for the Marianas Islands Testing and Training Area. I refuse to call it the study area, but this is about 1 million nautical miles in our surrounding waters. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about that in my slides. I guess we could cue them up now if that's okay. There we go. So this is a video that we made. If you could go ahead and press play on the video. At the bottom of the slide.
Well,
Sorry, there it is.
While they're setting up, I just want to recognize my oversight, my vice chair
Yes.
of the military buildup, Senator Paris. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Senator Paris. So this first slide is actually a video that shows the overlap of the area that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has identified for potential mining and extraction for minerals, now flanking both sides of the archipelago. This is actually the Guam area, and it's right within the MIT. So you can see here, the blue lines represent the areas where they're looking into mining. The red area is the trench, and it's right within the MIT. So I just wanted to show the overlap. And of course, this race for rare earth minerals, this is being fast-tracked by the Trump administration. This is part of the geopolitical competition that the United States has with China to reduce its dependency on these minerals, but also these minerals are used for weapons manufacturing and technology. So this is very much connected to the military-industrial complex. This is another kind of military destruction in that sense, and another colonial and imperialist resource grab that we in the Marianas are experiencing. Next slide, please. And so several endangered and protected marine species are identified as being harmed in the MIT, in the Marianas Islands Testing and Training Area, and those include turtles. A lot of these are protected and endangered species. They include sharks and rays, and they include mammals such as whales and dolphins, and many other species, including fish and corals. Next slide, please. Oh, that's an image of short-finned pilot whales near Anatahan in the Marianas, and that's a photo by NOAA. Next slide, please. So the Navy, just to say this, the Navy uses a lot of these species to be like caricatures for their campaigns that they're protecting them, but these are actual images of the species they claim to be protecting in their greenwashing campaigns that will be hurt in the activities within the MIT. And so this is just some vocabulary for you to understand the difference between a take, incidental take, injury, mortality, level A harassment, level B harassment, auditory injury, hearing threshold, temporary threshold shift, and behavioral response. Basically, a take excuses the military from any accountability and consequences from harassing, injuring, or killing sea life, including protected species during MIT activities. Now, it's basically a permission slip for them to go out and destroy our ecology, contaminate our waters while they're playing war in the oceans that surround us. Next slide, please. And so these are just some other images. These are rough-toothed dolphins south of the Marianas Ridge. And then this is a very rare sighting of striped dolphins in the Marianas. Next slide, please. This is a bride's whale, also in the Marianas. Next slide, please. Pilot whales south of the Marianas Archipelago. Next slide. These are just a couple examples of, this is actually a rehabilitated green sea turtle on the right. This is a photo from Guam PDN, and then a turtle nesting beach in Saipan on the left. Next slide. And actually, could you play this video? You can play it at the bottom. Yes, thank you. So this video just circulated actually right before the typhoon. This looks like a bride's whale, and this is just right off of Managaha Island. So these are just some of the species, actually, that will be impacted that are being impacted. And so now, during the typhoon, we can turn the slides off, thank you so much. During the typhoon, we didn't have power, water, internet, cell service, but the comment period for the new MIT EIS continued. And actually, we wrote to the government twice asking for a formal request to halt the comment period. It is completely inappropriate, inhumane even, to continue with the comment period during a tragic time, a very traumatic time of recovering and responding to a super typhoon, not just in Guam, but throughout the Marianas. And these plans are going to affect all of us in the Marianas. The new MIT includes planned increases, tenfold increases even, for using artillery, sonar, explosives in the area. And so that in itself is an injustice, but also to carry forward the process as if we don't count when we can't even respond is another injustice, another layer on that injustice. And so now I also just want to bring up, the missile defense system, since it's a topic of conversation now, especially looking at the almost $30 million appropriated or in the budget for land acquisitions. It's important to mention that in the sites plan for the missile defense system, that 3 of those sites overlie about 100 acres of non-DOD property. And that includes the sites at Arodi Point, Nimitz, and MCB-CM South. These are where launchers are going to be located. So at least 3 are non-DOD properties. And of all of the sites, there exists military contamination that was never cleaned up, including asbestos, lead paint, harmful pesticides, and other existing issues of contamination that the military has never even dealt with, that they'll have to remove if they decide, if they move forward with the sites for the missile defense system. On top of that, there's 10 historic properties and 14 unevaluated cultural resources that will be impacted, and these include a thermal feature, laddie pottery scatters, and a few others. And so we're looking at also impacts to, of course, ancestral material remains, the evidence of our ancestors' lives. And so with that, I just want to also add that, we're of the position that we want absolutely no nuclear reactors here for this missile defense system, and no nuclear power generation whatsoever for the military. We know that they depend on our grid, and our grid is not enough to power the missile defense system and the operations of the military. And joining Bao's call, we want to go further and ask that the legislature pursue a full-on ban of nuclear power generation. A lot of people are going to say it's a clean alternative, it's very safe now, but we really don't have to look far to see an islands within Micronesia, that are suffering from unresolved issues around storage of nuclear waste that the United States left here. And because of federal law, the United States is not required to remove their own nuclear waste that exists in the Marshall Islands, because they are a sovereign nation, even though it's nuclear waste that was put there by the United States. And we, need to think about how this is going to impact our journey toward decolonization, to self-determination. How are we going to be, a fully realized, decolonized, sovereign country if we're taking over and reclaiming lands that are so heavily contaminated and really can't be used for producing food or for living on? Water that's so contaminated. These are truly going to affect our security more than the presence of more bombs, more planes, more missiles. And so I'll end there. And thank you all so much for listening. And we see that the presence of the bases here makes us a bigger target for war. And we do not consent. The people of Guam have never consented, just like we've never ceded our sovereignty. We've never consented to be a site for war, which is what we're being set up to be once again. Sizos Masi.
Thank you so much, Monica. At this time, if there's anybody else who would like to come up and make comments or provide any kind of testimony? Nothing at this time. Don't be afraid. This is your island. Okay. At this time, I'd like to now turn it over. Anyone? Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to allow my colleagues to, ask some questions and some comments. Senator Barnett, you are now recognized.
Sizos Masi, Madam Chair, Biba Betness, and thank you again to the people watching on our new and improved YouTube live stream. Thank you to our AV team for those improvements. And thank you to the panel. Wow, Maniaka, I was hoping you wouldn't stop. Just keep going. No, obviously, I think that when you look up and you see us, these three faces, and maybe there's just a couple more in this legislature that's willing to stand up and try and fight a lot of these issues associated with military buildup, associated with, political status. And I have to agree with you, Monica, there sure is a lot of talk this election season, but it's just very disappointing that my good colleague, the chair of this committee, is really the only member of the majority here who gives a damn about these issues with the military buildup. I mean, for the rest of my colleagues in the Republican majority, we see very little to no concern. In fact, they might be watching this hearing and throwing labels that you included in your testimony to include anti-military. I said this last term on the floor, I don't think it's a question of anti-American, anti-military. It really is a question, as the congressman framed it, of being pro-Guam and, asking the questions, is it good for our island? And I think, 90% of the time, the answer is no. And the other 10% of the time, we don't have enough information to even make a determination or ask the question. So I definitely appreciate your testimony. And yeah, it's just a struggle because we're constantly under this avalanche of information that we've kind of got to sort through, and then to kind of make these comments when really we haven't even been able to digest a lot of the information and occurrences that we're supposed to be commenting on. So, I'm very reluctant to comment because I think the whole thing is kind of skewed against, obviously, against the interests of the people of Guam. So we jump through these hoops, we make these comments, we look at these deadlines and our comments, and they just disappear into thin air. So, as kind of a new lawmaker, I'm trying to figure out how we get back to that one Guam approach where, man, it seems like maybe a decade or more ago that we really had some more alignment with the executive branch, the congressional and the legislative branch. I mean, we were all on the same page about where we stood with the military buildup and asking questions and trying to fight against some of these things. And now it's we're just victims of the divide and conquer, right? I mean, we have an executive branch that seems very willing to work with the Department of War behind closed doors. And we have a congressman who I think is really, unfortunately falling short on a lot of these issues that he should be bringing up to the federal government. So, Congressman Underwood, in your testimony, you talked about countermeasures. So I'd just like to ask, how do we as a legislature work better with your group to kind of institute some of these countermeasures? Because, we introduced a bill in the last legislature calling for a full ban on nuclear microreactors. We recently passed the public law, of course, banning not banning deep sea mining necessarily, but doing what we could within the confines of our status, which was kind of just to say, like, if you're docking at our port and it's got anything to do with deep sea mining, no, we do not consent. And so, Congressman, if you could just maybe offer some advice to us.
Well, thank you for those comments, Senator. Of course, it's very difficult to imagine because we as an island and as a political structure, we seemingly have no capacity to resist that, and we're constantly overwhelmed with information, as you've outlined, and trying to deal with the complexity of the information and the nuances of the information is difficult. And, sometimes between Leela and myself and Ken Cooper, we always say, well, we're 3 people, and how many people do they have up there on Nimitz Hill working this issue? And, there's just 3 of us. And then, of course, there's Muñeca and Bao, and I want to congratulate them for their detailed testimony. So, fortunately, there's AI. So, I know the legislatures had access to a couple of AI programs, maybe down to 1 now. I'm not sure. I'm just trying to keep track of that in terms of what's going on in the legislature. But, using that tool, there are probably many state legislatures that have passed laws that have restricted or affected military activities in their own state that we don't really know about. And I was trying to imagine that there's some of those that are ongoing. So now, for example, the state of Hawaii has a kind of a law against or a rule about nuclear reactors. So what is keeping the Guam legislature from engaging in that is that we should really look through the miracle of AI and through some very direct research to find out what those laws may be. And they may be even in red states. And I'm sure, I'm almost positive that those laws and rules exist. And we're constantly told that we can't do that because A, that's a federal responsibility, and B, anyways, you're just an unincorporated territory. You don't have any real power or efficacy to do this. So that's one possible route. And of course, I don't want to make it political, but obviously you have to kind of elect leaders that are willing to deal with this from a position of strength rather than a position of weakness. And constantly we're involved in kind of partnerships that never really materialize, or partnerships that we think we have but we don't really have, or an attempt to kind of make it sound like, oh, we're all friends, we can all get along. And so the style of one Guam, green Guam, remember that? I mean, that was a going thing. So, to deal with some of the issues that Muñeca brought up, and now that's gone. Of course, now one Guam, green Guam has become 2 Guams, and one green, maybe not one so green. And now we have all of these issues. And it's the total lack of concern about the local population that is most disturbing. If you look back, and because, you read press releases, and so Delegate Moylan has said there's $1.9 billion for Guam, $1.9 billion. If someone had started off by saying, if we're going to get money from the military, can we earmark 5% of that for some Guam projects? Can we come to an agreement? That'd be $95 million. But of course, there's no such thing. There's no such animal in that whole process. So even as a deal-making process, even if we were to say, let's make a deal, there's no deal. There's nobody dealing. There's none of that, let alone the idea that you have serious issues that you're confronted with, but you feel like you don't have the capacity. Well, you know, flood the gates with the legislative initiatives that are ongoing in other states. I don't think that we have to sit back and wait for that. I think we could do that so that demonstrates the seriousness. And then, of course, you know, we have to, you know, at some point in time hold fellow elected officials to task or to accountability for their positions.
Yeah, and I think that's. Thank you for the answer, by the way. But you're right, we've tried to introduce different measures, and then the pushback we get from, and you could read the writing on the wall, you know, if you just do the math. We introduce a bill to ban nuclear microreactors and kind of figure we're only going to get 4 votes on it, you know. So again, it comes down to the people of Guam voting wisely. And, you know, I commend everybody at this table because while we're struggling to interpret and make sense of the avalanche of information, you guys are in the forefront, and you're giving it to us in a way that's, you know, very digestible. Not just us, but to the, like you said, democratizing that information is so very important, because that's why a lot of people, I feel, have this archaic mindset of, you know, the extremes. You're either anti this or you're, you know, pro that, is because maybe they don't have the information. I mean, the local media barely reports on the issues surrounding the military buildup. And I think what we've seen here in my experience is, like I said, it's a divide and conquer. The admirals feel like they don't have to bother with the legislature because they have the cooperation of the governor and lieutenant governor. And so that's what I've seen in my experience is, why would they even bother coming down here to the People's House to answer just kind of basic questions? I mean, we're not trying to pry classified secrets out of anybody. And I think they kind of dismiss the entire lawmaking body of the island of Guam because they have a great relationship with the governor and lieutenant governor, which I think, you know, given our political status, if we had a governor, lieutenant governor who were more assertive in defending the rights of the people of Guam, I mean, I think that we could fast track a lot of these political status discussions if we had a governor, a lieutenant governor. And I said this before, I'm not saying lay down in front of the bulldozer, but, you know, take a stand for the people, instead of continuing to meet with, you know, the military brass behind closed doors, because that's kind of the situation that we have now, is we're all here yelling into the wind. And the admirals, their ears are closed because they've already kind of made the deals and they have the cooperation of the executive branch. So that's very, very frustrating. Leland, do you agree with Congressman? In your testimony, you talked about taking small tactical steps and how important it is for us to get some wins.
So just a couple of things real quick. I think it's important, and I say this in the statement, but I'll say it more directly. Joint Region Marianas, Joint Task Force Micro are messengers. If they can successfully get somebody in Guam to agree with what has come down the pike for them to deliver, they've done their job. If nobody's pushing back, if no one says, no, we don't like your message, take it back. If no one's doing that, then those guys are going to get promoted. And by the way, we've seen that regularly. People come here and get quick agreements for issues in Guam. They get promoted. So thinking about national strategies, national policies, and where Guam figures in, thinking about leverage for Guam. And look, I don't want to overstate one Guam, green Guam. If you have an agreement with the military, you're going to have to hold their feet to the fire all the time because, you know, it's a turnstile. People are always moving through, moving out. So you're going to have to hold their feet to the fire. But I think it's important to remember a general framing. Guam, under the United Nations, is a non-self-governing territory. And technically, under international law, administering powers are not supposed to be conducting military activities in non-self-governing territories. Now, I know when I was involved with the Commission on Self-Determination and the Commission on Decolonization, we regularly had visits to New York at the General Assembly with representatives from Guam. We tended not to use that particular lever. In our discussions, we focus more on the general, generic, Guam is a non-self-governing territory, we have a right to self-determination, et cetera. However, that particular lever was used at a point in time by Speaker Wonpat, who went and testified on military activities, and guess what? That's what led to the One Guam, Green Guam. That made people in Washington stand up and go, we need to do something different. We need to make a deal. But as long as you're making the deal behind the guy that's the messenger, without trying to adjust the policy, you're not going to get a good deal. So you've got to elevate the discussion. Small tactical wins, I think there's got to be something on housing. There's got to be a prohibition, no more military personnel until you provide housing. There's got to be things like that that you start to do to show that you're serious about it. Otherwise, look, the housing issue has been talked about, not just by this governor, but by previous governors and these committees that they have, that they meet, once a year or now once a quarter for over a decade. And of course, the military always says, oh yes, we're concerned about housing. What's it got you?
If I could just add to that, Senator, I think what Leland has pointed out is absolutely correct in the sense that you're connecting a specific military activity to a specific social, economic, and political issue that matters to people. So sometimes if we're talking about micro-nuclear reactors, some people say, well, nuclear power is okay. That's a different debate. But I don't think anybody on this island can seriously maintain that the price of housing is out of control, and that's directly connected to military activities. And so that's like making that issue central to that. I feel like, just in a little bit of banter between Senator Taitague and us before the hearing, she was also sort of lamenting that it's very difficult to get some of the sitting senators involved in this. And I said, well, it's like your house has been burglarized now 3 times, and the solution is to build sidewalks. It's like, let's just focus on something else. Well, in the meantime, everything in the society is being disturbed and disrupted, and the solution is to, let's focus on something else and not at the real problem. And so trying to find that, is going to be, I admit that it's difficult, and I admit that the forces that are arrayed against it seem invincible. But as we just have to keep in mind, and I think Leland points it out, the people on Nimitz Hill are not the people that actually make any decisions. They are important, and they got a tough job, and I respect them. But they're not people who make decisions. They're messengers. And if we treat them as if they were up there on the hill looking down on us, which they are physically, and we respond to them that way, we empower them more than they need to be. And the fact that they don't show up here in a hearing is lamentable, but I guarantee you that if you had a bill that was seriously being heard on any one of these issues, they would try to show up in some fashion.
I'm not well versed on legislative strategy and government strategy, but I have seen the power of the people. I have seen things happen when you have a wave of passionate people coming together to defend our island, to stand up for the issues. And I think, just last night I was reviewing an October 2017 hearing on the buildup, and this whole legislature was packed. You had all of the military here, and you've had all of the stakeholders were here. This whole room was packed. And I was looking at that and I was saying, wow, this hearing is filled with so much passion and so much energy and so much bravery to sit there and question the military top brass on Guam. You had Kathy McCullum had a really heartfelt, passionate, effectively delivered testimony that had all of the military just they couldn't even speak. They were speechless. You know, Senator Hope was there, and you had them question, right here at the table, you had them question the military, and the military had to answer. So I see right now that there's this big disconnection between interacting with the people on these issues and with the military, and I think that, you know, you've hit it right on the nose. The military already has the cooperation with the administration. You know, they don't need to go to the legislature. They don't need to go to the people. So I think that, you know, if we somehow connect these big, deep issues at this point in time and get the people riled up to come out and demonstrate and be visible, then all of the other senators who are not here today will have to take notice, and they will have to make their opinions known. So I think legislative strategy and empowering the people is key to standing up against what we could possibly lose.
Well, you know, I wonder, you know, about, gosh, it's a little overwhelming because we should all be angry, but are we angry enough? Are we angry enough? And I have to say that it's really disheartening when our own leadership doesn't represent the anger, the grief, the rage of the people, and instead capitulates to bootlicks even. I'll say it, bootlickers. Whenever we hear words like mitigation and data recovery, that means destruction and contamination are guaranteed to happen or has already happened. And no person speaking for the people of Guam, and specifically for the Chamorro people, should ever say that that is acceptable. You know, no director of any agency, no president of any agency, and definitely not the governor and lieutenant governor. We are not angry enough, and that's what we want from the leadership, to be angry, to be strong, and not to capitulate and compromise. This is, you know, I wonder sometimes if people are thinking about the future instead of the moment right now. What are we leaving behind for the future generations? What, you know, we've already been colonized for 500 years, almost 200 under the United States, 300 under Spain, and we know we've lost a lot. And so we have to protect what is left for the future generations. And you know, I wish that our folks would rise up in numbers, because there is strength in numbers. And so it used to be that when we protested, you know, it's really interesting because we've seen waves of activism. We've heard different elders, for instance, activists threaten congressional reps or spit in people's faces or, openly threaten members of the federal government. Those days are gone, and now there's increased hostility from this administration to anybody protesting and resisting against ultimately the destruction of our homeland. And so when our own leaders are also silencing us, forcefully removing us, sometimes using excessive force, threatening us, and also gaslighting us, and speaking about us dishonestly, as if we're the threats, we're the ones being disrespectful, we're the ones, the disrespect, the biggest disrespect is the desecration of the final resting places of our ancestors. The biggest disrespect is the poisoning of our aquifer, which has been happening now for generations, from Agent Orange to PFAS and now Dieldrin. So many harms, so many injustices that have never been dealt with, directly connected to the military occupation of our island and their operations. And so it is our responsibility, truly, as members of this community and as leaders of this body and leaders at Adelup and at all the leadership in every agency, to challenge and not accept the bare minimum and the status quo. Sizos Masi.
Can I add one more thing? I think part of the reason we're not seeing this wave or this is because of the lack of information coming out of the meetings. I know, Senator Barnett, you questioned why are these negotiations not available to the public? You know, up to now, I mean, have there been minutes that were produced to you from the administration? Nobody knows what's going on in these meetings. Yeah. So that you have an effective pall of silence over these negotiations. You know, if we knew what they were, we don't even know if they agreed to having the micronuclear reactors come in, you know? So I think that this lack of information, this lack of the public knowing what is going on, what are we being, you know, what's being negotiated, is a big part in why the people are not getting upset, not getting riled up. So I hope at some point that we will have the minutes from the negotiations from the meeting that was requested from the last hearing, and it's very telling that you haven't even gotten them now. Were there even any minutes? Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, because there was some recent developments with the programmatic agreement. I know we've had just a bunch of different hearings in here, but I just wanted to, if you could, because I haven't talked to you about this pausing of the programmatic agreement. Is this a small tactical win, or is this election year politics?
To be quite honest with you, we're grateful that there's a pause and that nothing went forward. But when you look at the response from the acting governor, the only thing he gave up were issues that everybody could agree on, which is cultural heritage. The other issues, the core issues of land taking, of a combined monopoly of administrative oversight. The really deep issues were not even addressed. And I think that at this point, I would, if it could somehow be resurrected, I don't know if this is even possible, push for 144.38 and just completely get rid of the 2008 programmatic. Did I get the resolution number? To completely get rid of the 2008 agreement and this current draft and go right back to the section 106, which provides more protection. So I think that the pause is great. I don't know what's going to come of this pause, whether, you know, right now it's being reviewed legally, but is this just a way to say, okay, it's legal, let's move forth and not have any of our, you know, concerns addressed? So I'm thankful that the pause happened, but we're still in the cloud on what it will bring.
Thank you. The three of you were here when you asked, the three of you asked Shippo Patrick Lujan for a roundtable that allowed for the public to go through a review of the programmatic agreement, get an understanding of it, and then give recommendations. And you asked that those recommendations be considered and included, and we know that that didn't happen. You cannot have a meeting for the public without inviting the public, and that's what ended up happening. Of course, we brought up the violation of open government, and then the SHPO openly said he will not work with the public, and that is extremely problematic for any representative of the government of Guam and our state historic preservation officers to just refuse to engage the community. And basically, this Saturday we're having our second forum. These are the kinds of meetings that we were also hoping to see. These are the kinds of meetings that we've actually been asking for, the kind of engagement and transparency that we've been asking for. And we're doing it ourselves. The community is doing it. Pertehi is responding to community members and their requests and demands. And that's, I would say it's shameful that after, 3 administrations and almost 8 years of this one, this is what we've been asking for, and we never got it. And now we have to do it ourselves. And we welcome the pause. We appreciate the pause. And we do question if it's a gesture for optics. And we refuse to be used for optics. Caesar Masi.
I just want to add that the Historic Preservation Office and the SHPO position is one of the few agencies on our island that should have teeth. It's one of the few agencies that can tell the military to stand back and take a deep breath and do what you need to do before we consent. And this whole process, what came out of the PA, there's no teeth. Everything was just given up to military oversight. So I would like to see at some point the office and the position have the power that they had so that we can be protected. But to just sweep everything under the rug, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with anything this important.
Yeah, we saw the former State Historic Preservation, or the Guam Historic Preservation Officer, I should say, use Stipulation 13 in the other programmatic agreement time and time again to stop work when those activities reflected findings that were in violation. And so this programmatic agreement draft doesn't have anything like that. We don't see that sort of engagement with this SHPO activating the stipulations within the programmatic agreements to stop work where there's been a disturbance and a desecration. And also what was revealed in the hearing on the resolution, which I really appreciated, was that in Senator Perez's FOIA, she discovered that there was damage. There was damage to historic and cultural properties that happened because of loopholes in the 2008 PA, and those have not been addressed. And it's as if the SHPO himself is just checking off the boxes procedurally so that this can be signed and pushed forward. And we should question why the State Historic Preservation Officer is trying to push forward a programmatic agreement that is not aligned with Guam law and federal law.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think the original ask that we had made was that the whole thing be thrown out and started from scratch because there was a lack of community engagement in the consultation process, which is from the beginning. I mean, I think in this room I won't say I was willing to compromise, but we did say, hey, Masaya, have a round table and get the comments and, commit to possibly including them. I thought that was a great compromise, but instead what we saw was what we saw, where we have now a SHPO who has said, absolutely he does not want to engage the public. And I think that this whole process, the most important part of it is engaging the public. So I think it's a little bit of Joshie come lately. And then also the pause, I don't support it. I think it doesn't address, our original complaint about the programmatic agreement and the entire process. And then just on the matter of the nuclear reactors, Congressman Underwood had said something, and I think you too, Maneka, had said something about, our history of radioactivity, nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific. And I think that's what kind of colors this whole issue of the micronuclear reactors for our people, many of whom, caught cancer because they were downwind of, nuclear radiation. And, asking us to host micronuclear reactors is a lot like blowing cigarette smoke in a cancer survivor's face. I mean, we have the historical context to be suspicious of this. And, unfortunately, I don't think that we have the support to even, get a bill moved forward that would bar this technology from our island. And it was in this room in the previous term, we had the officials from the Missile Defense Agency, and I asked, because at the time it was a footnote, and I think you're the one that shared this with me, Leland. It was a footnote in a report that was like 100 pages deep, and individual that we had asked about it said, "Oh, that was just like they're just talking about it. There's nothing concrete." And just a couple of years later, we're now hearing that it's actually very concrete and almost a done deal. You talk about lack of information. I watched the governor in D.C. and those senators over there don't even know that, our grid is what the military's hooked up on. So thank you. I know I'm taking up all the time. Thank you, Madam Chair, for, a lot of the other senators, when they have their hearings, they limit us to 5 minutes to ask questions. And that's like, we're not, we're adults. So we have big problems, big questions. We can't solve the island's problems in 5 minutes. So thank you for the time, Madam Chair. And Sijos Masi, again, I mean, there's so many other things that we can discuss relative to this issue. So I'm just very grateful that we've been able to have this conversation here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. And you can rest assured that we're not going to stop talking about this. We're not going to set it aside, as many of the other senators feel, like Dr. Underwood said, start looking at sidewalks and stuff like that. So that was excellent. Yeah. And at this time, I'd like to recognize my Vice Chair of the Military Buildup, Senator Paris. You are recognized, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to the panel here. And thank you for all your expertise that you've brought here today. I just want to focus in on the testimony provided by Leland Bettis. And it's very disturbing to hear in one of your points, you state that Guam's military value from strategic sanctuary to strategic vulnerability. And you state here that you state that that Guam is considered as vulnerable, and yet, so can you basically reconcile the infrastructure that's being placed here in the billions of dollars, and yet we're considered as vulnerable?
Well, again, I provided several examples earlier. Effectively, technology has changed Guam's status in terms of its military value. Specifically, missiles and missile technology has moved Guam from being a place that was not an achievable target, even probably by airplanes, to one that's now a 20-minute express from China or North Korea. And we first began to see this in 2020 when at Andersen Air Force Base they removed the B-52s. And they did that at the time specifically because they didn't want effectively 15% of the inventory of B-52s on a runway at Andersen that could evaporate in the event of attack. And since that time, we've seen more and more progressive things that demonstrate Guam's vulnerability. I mean, if you think about Andersen, and I mentioned this in the testimony, got the largest storage of fuels of any air base in the U.S. inventory. Got the largest munitions storage of any air base in the U.S. inventory. And there's not a single plane up there that can deliver that. And the reason they don't have the planes there is because they don't want to put those planes at risk in the event of a conflict. Guam is recoverable. They'll try to sort of figure it out and work between divert airfields to figure out how to come in and out of Guam. But Guam is just vulnerable, period, from the Air Force's point of view. And the second order of that is the development of these divert airfields. Tinian, Saipan is being expanded. Yap, there's federal appropriations for Yap. Palau. All these are developments intended to make room for the possibility that Guam is, as they call it, not available in the event of a national emergency or natural disaster. So the vulnerability is very, very clear. I think the recent Senate National Defense Authorization Act had a provision which makes this even more clear. Someone on the Senate side has said that the Department of War has to certify to the defense committees that effectively there's a redundant capability for the Aegis Guam Command and Control Center that's being set up for missile defense. Now, the Aegis Command and Control Center is not even developed yet. And already people are saying, wait, we need a redundant command and control center. So I think, that, again, just 3 examples to give you a really good sense of how vulnerable the military views Guam as. Look, missile defense itself, the whole missile defense system, is a red flag about what you think is going to happen in the event of conflict. And the recent disclosure that the head of the U.S. Pacific Command wants offensive missiles, I mean, that really is sort of it's very, very clear that the U.S. military sees Guam as highly vulnerable. Now, how do I reconcile that with the fact that there's nothing for civilian shelters? I can't justify that. But it's clear, I mean, look, it's not, the military's doing what the military thinks they need to do. And, you know, they don't particularly think about Guam as a civilian community. They think about Guam as a base. And that's their job. That's the way they do it. We can't let them get away with that. We live here. You can't say Guam is vulnerable and provide all these examples about how vulnerable Guam is, spend billions of dollars to supposedly defend the vulnerability, and then not even think about the local community. It's unconscionable, really. And for all the talk about homeland that you hear people in the military talk about when they refer to Guam, you know, this doesn't sound like homeland in that context. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, yes. And have you heard that there are bunkers on base being constructed?
I have not personally seen any bunkers, but I can't imagine that the new complex at Camp Blas doesn't have some sort of shelters for personnel.
Okay, yes, I heard there was rumors that they are building bunkers on base. The other thing that you mentioned is that, and yet they're not building it for the civilian population, like you said. The other thing that you mentioned was that Guam is not part of the national security strategy, nor part of the national economic strategy. So, you know, we all are advocating that Guam have a seat at the table. I mean, it's really critical that when decisions are made, that we need to be there. And, you know, I agree with you, Dr. Underwood, that we're talking to the individuals that are given the orders and not the decision makers. And so how do you see that we can be at the table when it comes to these decisions that are made at a higher level?
That question for me? Well, thank you. Thank
Anybody
you very
in the
much.
panel, but thank you.
And just to add to that, of course, Guam doesn't have a specific seat at the table, but it always has some seat at some table. And that's the point at which I think advocacy, you know, there's regular meetings that are going on in D.C., there are committee hearings, there's the IGIA, there's the annual review of things. Those are places upon which Guam can make a case. But what cases it's making when it has the opportunity to do so? What is the issue that is being raised? That seems disconnected. I will add this, that, you know, because they talked about the mini pause and then the issues that you're trying to, pressure does work. And think about it. The Guam Defense Forum was really a defensive measure on the part of Indo-PACOM at the time in order to ratify and to demonstrate that they're interested, but they're not really going to do anything, you know. But they did do that. And the way it was constructed was to make sure that certain people didn't show up or that they weren't invited to be part of panels, but they kind of assuaged themselves. Now, a lot of noise was made about housing. And Leland and I were participants in a meeting with an assistant secretary that made a solemn commitment. We're going to do something about housing. And how long ago was that? I don't know. You know, it's been a couple of years. But unless the pressure is continually made, not just by, you know, activist organizations or even think tanks, but basically through elected officials. Even if they seem like lone voices in the wilderness, they will have an impact. And I think the Guam Defense Forum was an example of that. And I'm thinking that along the lines here, we're all of a sudden, just based even on this hearing, just based on these conversations that are ongoing, I venture to, I'm pretty sure that some forum will be suggested in the future, that this will be, and it will be, again, another public relations kind of forum rather than an avid discussion. And so the greatest public relations line that we are being treated to is that you're part of the homeland. That is the greatest public relations line. Whoever thought it up as a communication strategy, and then to constantly repeat it, a carrier comes to Guam, and the first thing the commander says is, we're here because Guam is part of the U.S. homeland. I didn't know that. I thought you're just here because carriers come through here all the time. I've never heard that before. But that is really the whole essence of this. So it is seen as a communications problem rather than a policy issue. And our task is to make it a policy issue. That's really and I know that it's difficult, and then you have to kind of consider all the levers you have. Micronuclear reactor, what does GPA say about it? What does GPA say about nuclear energy? What are they saying? And then that area of activity and inquiry is more under the control of the Guam legislature. That's the kind of pressure that should be exerted, and it has to be kind of multifaceted. And as I said before, your AI program ought to help you figure that out.
Senator, I think, Guam is not mentioned in the national security strategy. Guam is not mentioned in the national defense strategy, which probably surprises some people if you think about how much money is being poured here per square mile, probably more than anywhere else in the entire U.S. system. I would suggest to you we're not in those strategies because the people that are in charge of running the operation in Guam for the military today are satisfied they've got everything under control. If we're not saying we need to be in the strategy, if we're not saying we need shelters, if we're not saying, does this really make sense for us, and the military guys are going, hey, don't worry about it, we're not going to be in those strategies. I think it's that simple. So, silence gives everybody a pass. And we don't get the attention we need.
It seems like a catch-22 here because, for one, we're dealing with the lower end of the hierarchy, right? And if they don't want to come to the table, for instance, or they feel that they're, I guess perhaps the people that are communicating with them are giving them assurances, right? So, they don't need to come to the table with us.
Yeah, and just to ratify that point, because what that means is that whatever's going on in Nimitz Hill, they're reporting back that everything is under control. Don't worry about it. We got this covered. And so, it's like any other kind of institutional behavior. An institution doesn't move unless it feels threatened or it feels that it has to respond. It has historically been the strategy of those up in Nimitz Hill to talk to the mayors because they find a more receptive audience than to talk to the legislature. So that's a kind of like a constant trope that not only are they behaving that way, they're telling each other this is what you do. And of course the mayors are receptive to it because, who doesn't want their bus stops painted, or who doesn't want these community projects that are like, you talk about a cost-effective use of resources, that generates what is seen to be as great, public support for really minimal effort, very minimal effort on their part. And so that has been like, and I've heard this, for decades now. That's why they like to engage what they call real community leaders in the name of village mayors. And then, whatever the legislature is, they're not going to show up here unless there's something really at stake for them, or they think it's. And normally, it would be hard-pressed to see where members of military commands show up at state legislatures anyways. But they do on occasion if something is at risk. And right now, the fact that they're not really engaging demonstrates that either they're oblivious to the concerns or they think nothing is at risk. And so, that suggests that we have to make them aware of our concerns or put them at risk.
Just one other point on that. I would suggest that expecting an admiral, a one-star admiral in Guam, to carry your water is probably not a good strategy either. because the military itself is built around a system that rewards people going with the grain, not against it. So if Washington says, we want this in Guam, you're not going to get an admiral in Guam going, oh, well, the people in Guam have some different ideas. They're not going to do that. It's going to hurt their promotion chances. So, I mean, I think we have to be realistic about, you know, what we're dealing with in terms of this process. And that's why you really need to elevate the discussion outside of Guam. I would say even beyond Hawaii. This has got to be the kind of thing that goes to Washington, D.C. and to New York at the UN to really raise the level of discourse.
Thank you. And the other point that you raised, Leland, was the military priorities change all the time. And you know, there was so much effort and money put into the Camp Blah space. So much destruction that occurred, and you know, the community came out, you know, fought really hard, but now we're seeing, you know, change. Like you said, the priorities have changed. The Polaris point you pointed out was the most recent example. They cleared that whole area, and now it's going to Australia. So, you know, what do you suggest? I mean, I know you've gave a lot of recommendations so far, but, you know, as far as what other recommendations can you provide to the community so that we are not victims, or we are not subject to the vagaries of war, the focus of war? And, you know, of course, we don't want war, but, yeah, that our lands are being sacrificed, our artifacts, our heritage is being at risk, and it's being lost. I know we need people in these positions to really be there, and we need to be united. And I think that's the problem, like my colleague had mentioned. We're not all united in this, you know, basically speaking out and, you know, ensuring that our land is protected, our history is protected, but then only to find out later that, you know, it's dispensable, it's no longer needed. And I think that's the bigger question, you know, when we know that the U.S. military has over 700 installations worldwide, this idea of redundancy becomes dispensable, that, you know, any of these installations are dispensable. And that is a question that we have to ask ourselves, right? Do we want to continue on this trajectory where even our homeland itself, the water that we drink, you know, we know it's already impacted, but being further impacted? And when we talk about micronuclear reactors, that relies on, you know, uranium. And even though they say that the technologies improve, uranium's half-life is over 700 million years, which means exposure to carcinogens for multiple generations, right? So, yeah, anything you can provide is, I mean, I applaud you for being very vigilant, providing the latest information, you know, but if there's anything else that you can recommend so that we can really strengthen our resolve here.
I think we have to be ahead. We have to be ahead of the information curve as much as we can, and to voice concerns about issues that are rising. On the Camp Blah's issue, I mean, I can tell you, and a very close friend of mine was on the National Security Council at one point in time as a uniformed personnel, and he met with the Commandant of the Marine Corps as the Camp Blah's issue was sort of in abeyance. And I was not in the meeting, I heard this secondhand, so the Marine Corps Commandant says, we don't want to be in Guam. You know, every time a dolphin washes up on the beach, we're going to be blamed. We're Marines, we break things. Guam is not the place we want to be. So my point is that I think even sometimes within the institutional structure of these places, there is a recognition that things need to be handled a little differently in Guam. I know the former head of the Missile Defense Agency went out of his way 4 years ago to talk about how Guam was a tourist destination and they needed to make, you know, the radomes and the missile defense launchers look pretty because of the tourists. Now, that's not, you know, saying we don't want missile defense, but there's a recognition there that what's happening in Guam is a little different and a little over the edge. And I think we have to think about ways to leverage any of those sort of attitudes and sensitivities where they do exist to our advantage. But if we simply go, say nothing, do nothing, then it's going to come.
Monica, you raised your hand?
Well, just even to think about PARS, the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors, and their fight, and Senor Robert Celestial's fight for just to fund medical care for our folks who have been exposed to radiation from the nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. And the reason why, you know, there's many reasons why we can assume that it hasn't been funded. Racism, for one, but also because it's going to open up a Pandora's box for the federal government to fund every other exposed community, from Saipan to Palau to Yap, everywhere else that has been impacted. And, you know, we've seen it added to NDAAs and taken out, and we've seen them reduce the years, trying to ignore the half-life of the nuclear contamination. So it just, you know, we have had many people go, I mean, he went all the way to the Senate and tried to argue for compensation, for medical care, for our folks who suffer from all kinds of illnesses specifically associated to that exposure. And then just, you know, sorry, I just wanted to add a note to the greenwashing thing I was talking about earlier. We now see USS Washington out there picking up trash at Epau Beach, you know, and that's greenwashing because it's not talking about how they're dropping thousands of pounds of explosives in our ocean that they're not going to mitigate or clean up or remedy, and that we're going to be stuck with that contamination. I just saw a picture of it from PDN that USS Washington's out there picking up trash, and that's the kind of stuff that the mayors are informed by. Like, hey, they're out here picking up our trash. Aren't they great? And with every flight and with every 1,000-pound bomb that they drop out there in the ocean, that's thousands and thousands of gallons of fossil fuels being burned. That's making us more susceptible to the climate crisis. We just survived a super typhoon. It's going to make us more vulnerable to that recovery, that kind of recovery in the future. And, you know, not to mention the thousands of dollars wasted to play war in our waters when all of these issues, from housing to healthcare, have been ignored. Guam is a recognized medically underserved location. And not just Guam, the whole of the Marianas. Tinian doesn't even have an operating clinic right now. And all of those issues are going to also be exacerbated with the increased labor that comes for all of these construction projects associated with the missile defense system and other operations, because all of that labor force is going to put more pressure on our medical care system. So just some reflection, listening to this great panel, just some other thoughts to add. Sizos Masi.
Sizos Masi. Yeah, the question for Monica, actually, so you mentioned about the MIT comments and how that can conflict with the mining, the deep sea mining. Have you had any response by the military in regards to that?
No, actually, we were hopeful that they would know that there's that we're suffering really from a very traumatic, not just Guam, the whole Tinian, Saipan even more so. We're suffering from a very difficult recovery after the super typhoon, and they should have paused. They should have paused the comment period. Actually, our friends from our Commonwealth 670 were planning 2 comment writing workshops that we were going to support with an expert, with a NEPA expert, and that had to be canceled because it's just completely inappropriate also for us to continue with some of our work in a time like typhoon recovery. It's just completely insensitive of the limitations and needs of our community. And so we wrote twice. We wrote the administration and some members of the legislature and also members of Joint Region Marianas asking for a pause in that comment period, and we received no response, and we saw no requests from the administration to pause on that comment period, which was really upsetting. But yeah, as you can see from the video, just the overlap of, a plan that will essentially destroy our future. Deep sea mining is going to remove minerals that took thousands and thousands of years to be created, and for for national security, for national prosperity. Again, conflating homeland and mainland, it's not going to benefit any of us. It's not going to benefit, it's going to destroy our future. And so, yes, we should see this layering of all of these horrible proposals as environmental racism and as just a complete violation of our indigenous rights and our human rights as well. Yep.
Yeah, just when you're showing the examples, just to kind of reaffirm that, you know, the whales, these are migratory animals.
Yes.
And so they're down here giving birth, right, I believe, right?
Yes.
So they travel as far as, I think, Alaska, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that's where they feed during the winter time, I believe, and then they come down here during the summer to nurse, to breed and to nurse. So that's, I think, you know, just, you know, as an environmentalist, I think that's really important to identify that these are cycles. These animals have existed for longer than humans have existed, and this is their way to survive. And we're really impacting a very, you know, important species, right, and their ecosystem.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just very disruptive, these testing and training. And then, of course, the turtles, too. They travel very far distances.
Mm-hmm.
And to really think about, you know, the beauty of life and how things can, you know, sustain themselves. And we are really undermining the very ecosystem that supports them, and it ultimately supports us. And so I think, you know, that's, you know, when we're talking about these activities, you know, oftentimes it's based out of fear, right? Fear because the fear of being impacted. But, you know, really what it's doing is undermining everything. And, you know, it's really important that we focus on, you know, the diplomacy, you know, really genuine security, like you mentioned before. It's like that is what's going to produce peace in the world, I think. And of course, I know that's not shared. That view is not necessarily shared, but you know, really, it's concerning to see the world become more militarized in regards to the nuclear power, right? And you know, what worked then does not work today, and we need to come up with new solutions. And I feel that really our indigenous knowledge, this is where we can shine. I really believe in that, and because we have a longer view, I feel. We've been in existence for so long that we know what works. And yeah, rather than relying on these unsustainable practices,
Right.
You know, we can see,
Yes.
we can see that this is not going to lead to anything good. And so I do have hope that we can really exert our knowledge, our wisdoms, because I think that's really what would be better for all of us. Thank you.
One of the CEOs from the metals company said that we are so colonized that we have no cultural ties, no spiritual ties anymore to the ocean. And of course, that's racist and just untrue. Whenever we go to these meetings for comment periods, whether it's for the MIT or the Missile Defense System, when we look at their maps of culturally sensitive areas, what they are identifying as cultural resources is so limited. It's all valuable. It's all a resource. It's all sensitive to us, and it's all a desecration. And even now, they're closing 3 nautical miles of the surface danger zone to test the firing range in the next few days. Those fishing grounds and, you know, the Rhoda Banks and the waters north of Letexan have been part of our culture for centuries. You know, if you talk to anybody in the fishing community, so many of the fisher folks say that's where they learn to fish, that's where their parents learn to fish, that's where their grandparents learn to fish. And even the marina is named after Gregorio Perez, who caught the Guinness Book largest marlin in those waters. Those waters are going to be closed in the next few days because the activation of one of the ranges. And so we're seeing a constant attack on our rights, on our heritage, on our even ways for food sustainability, for food security. And so It's so many things. It's really injustice layered on injustice layered on injustice. And I don't think we're angry enough. I don't think our leadership is angry enough. And so thank you all so much for continuing your efforts and continuing this conversation and engaging all of us. Sizosmasi.
Yeah, thank you too as well, Maneka, and thank you everyone here today. Sizosmasi. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you so much. And even though I'm going to, ask some questions, I want my colleagues to know that you can, say anything while I'm giving these comments, like something might come to your mind that you want to bring up. This is more relaxed, and so please feel free to, jump right in on something that you just remembered that might help the conversation flow to provide the information that our people really need. Because it's like you said, we need to find a solution. It's about solutions. It's also about being proactive rather than reactive when time is so sensitive. From what I gather, it takes, 7 minutes for any missile to hit Guam from China? And now with this new powered missile, it may take even shorter time. So it's important that we civilians, as the military has stated we are, we're civilians that are very patriotic. We've had the highest rate of per capita of people joining the military. And everyone sitting here today, I'm pretty sure, have someone very close in the family and even extended family that are military. So we do our part. We know this land belongs to the United States of America. United States of America. It's a big difference from U.S. territory. So how do we, like it's mentioned earlier, how do we get ourselves in the forefront, in their face, right? And that's some of the solutions that we can come together. The CMCC, it's a group that brought together that leaves the military out. So it's not just the military, leaving us out, but we're finding even our own government leaving the community out, leaving the legislature out. So we need to be aggressive, like you said, but done smart, educated-wise. But with anger, we have to at least, when we're pushing for that we turn that anger into more passion and ideas, as I mentioned, solution. It was brought up, to how do we get in their face scenario. Well, I remember there was a group of researchers that came to Guam on behalf of Congress. So I kind of looked up some other times where the congressional side, especially, former Congressman Underwood, that there have been multiple congressional visits to Guam in the recent years, and then this is within the 5 years, okay? Both members of CODEL, as well as the staff delegation, and a primary focus was on the military buildup. So on April 2024, the congressional member delegate CODEL, they came here to Guam. And during their visit, the delegation met with leaders and toured various military facilities, learning about the operations and capabilities and opportunities for growth. Then in 2025, congressional staff delegate, Staff Del, they also came. And the staff traveled to Guam to meet with military leaders, government officials, to receive updates in military construction infrastructure. And then there was the congressional, this is when I think Senator Paris, you and I were still senators when they came by in August 2023, was a group called the Congressional Research Service, which published a major report in August of 2023 titled Guam Defense Infrastructure and Readiness. So we are reaching out to someone else other than the military and asking them to be a part of ensuring that we have a voice. But the problem is all those visits in the last 5 years, what are they doing? Has there been a response from Congress? Does Congress see that we have been left behind in so many ways of protecting our own civilians on this island? So how do we find that, Congressman Underwood, find all those reports that Congress had, who came to Guam, gave those reports, are there somewhere, and where do they sit now? Are they collecting dust on a shelf and not even being paid attention to?
I don't think they're on a shelf. I think they're in somebody's computer, but I don't know. I don't know that they've even bothered to print up a report. The staff DEL and co-DEL phenomena. The staff DEL is always pursuant to somebody asking a question. It's never done on its own. The staff DEL is not going to come. A staff delegation is not going to come out here just to generally research something. There's usually a point to their purpose here, and that purpose is almost primarily, in that case, to try to figure out what they need to do in order to assist the military carry out its function. Oh. They're not here to figure out what the community wants. Having said that, it is possible that, you know, when you hear Congressional Research Service, a CRS report, those are organized by Congress in response to a specific question. And so that is where a delegate needs to speak up. Because if the delegate speaks up and gets a couple of people to sign on to it, they can get a GAO study. They can get a CRS report. And so the GAO study is usually more pointed. So they might ask a question, like, what's to keep GAO from studying the question, what is the total impact on the housing market of Guam by military activities? Well, what keeps them from engaging in that is nobody is forcing GAO to ask that question. And GAO is independent. They could do it. And so every time you read a GAO report, you just look at the beginning and you see what the question is. And then once you see who the question is, you can pretty much figure out who's asking the question, and then you'll see it somewhere in the course of the documentation. So the lack of GAO studies or the lack of any congressional inquiry on this is really a function of the Congressional Delegate's Office. So that's pretty clear. So if you're asking me, what can you do about it? Is you can write a letter to the delegate and say, why don't you ask this question? Why don't you cause a GAO inquiry about this and make public that letter? You know, you can make public the letter in advance of even writing it. I used to be very frustrated, I have to admit to this, that when I was sitting in Congress, some Guam senator would try to make press off of my office by writing me a letter saying you should do this, and then releasing the letter before I even ever got it, you know. So it's a little bit of gamesmanship. But in reality, people in the Guam legislature are free to do that. You're free to make that inquiry. So what are the issues? What are the issues related to micronuclear reactors? Who can cause a GAO study on that? And what are the issues related to that? All of those things are fodder for GAO studies, and GAO studies are almost always initiated by members of Congress. So that. Now, a CRS report is a little bit of a different status, but the report of a congressional delegation and the report of a staff delegation is never going to see the light of day. It's just not, because what they're doing is they're adding that information into the formation of legislation. So the staff are all getting together and they say, you remember they wanted this and the military needs this, and so let's put this into the NDAA, or let's see if the Pentagon is requesting it. So now when you look at the whole NDAA process, what you have now is basically the Pentagon has proposed this. This is the Trump administration's proposal. There's no kind of massaging that for Guam. There's no amendment specific to Guam. There's no Guam initiatives in there. I haven't looked at the NDAA the way that Leland has looked through it. But I'm assuming that the massaging of the NDAA is there by other members of Congress, that there are little kind of projects and nuances where you can massage it. But in this case, there's been very little massaging. And of course, you have to then kind of point out the differences between what is now in the House that will go to the floor and what is brewing in the Senate that will eventually go there, and see where the differences are. But the reporting process for a staff DEL is basically to go back to the committee and report on it, and then it'll find its way into legislation, or it'll find its way into some kind of congressionally directed activity. But it's not generally for public consumption. The GAO reports and CRS reports are, and those are prompted by political pressure from somebody in Congress.
Thank you so much for that explanation, and a process in which we can, follow, through with, because I still don't know. Well, with AI, maybe now I can find that report that was done in 2023 called the Guam Defense Infrastructure Readiness, so we can bring that to the forefront, and hopefully. Because the way I see it too, I think you have individuals in Congress who are really concerned about the civilians, and I think there are some in there that are voting members, thank goodness, and I've seen it when I've watched C-band and listened to them, that the humanitarian side is so important to the world. We're teaching people respect, dignity, and being able to protect themselves. So that being said, hopefully we can reach out to Congress, because they seem to be able to help us more than the military can, because they don't even show up anymore. Now, last year I had this, my whole nemesis was to have this military buildup every year. But of course, things change, like Leland said in his report, very quickly. Very, very quickly, like I mentioned in my opening about the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Times, I'm sorry, Wall Street, I'm thinking finances, but Washington Times, and the changes that are being made. So maybe we can pull from there. Go ahead.
If I may, Senator, even the report on the Washington Times, okay, so that report is somewhere. I mean, that story is based on a report somewhere. So who has access to that report? I would assume, I'm not for sure, but I would assume Delegate Moylan has access to that report. So where is that report, and where is the reporting from Delegate Moylan's office on that? Because that's like really critical, really critical. And are you going to ask for it in advance of his much-awaited speech before the legislature, or I'm not trying to make light of it, because it's a very serious issue. But information flow and trying to understand where information comes from, and people make it a little bit more complex than it actually is sometimes. And of course, there's different roles for different parts of Congress. But if a committee is coming here and the staff delegation's coming here, they're here to figure out how to help basically the military, especially if it's coming from the House Defense.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that this is not the last one. I think that because of the situation and the strike missiles alone is very alarming, that we need to have these informational hearings a lot more often. And I think, I have to say that I should have invited Delegate Moylan here to provide some information. But I think what I can do is give him enough time to put all this documentation, bring some of his staff, his own CRS, his staff to Guam to provide information that the community may have questions to. And again, invite you as well, the public, as well as even our own departments and agencies that were on the first part one of the informational hearing. This is something that I think everybody needs. I don't mean to scare people out there about Guam, but what can we do, Leland, to ensure safety? I mean, for our island, because regardless, the military, what they're not doing for us, helping with infrastructure, addressing the housing issues, all the issues that the military has brought forward to us, we cannot forget that there is one superpower out there in the world that would love to have Guam under their, jurisdiction and conquer there. I mean, we've been conquered how many times in our lives, you guys? I mean, from Japan to the Spanish, I mean, we've been invaded. Now, I'm sure China would love to have us. North Korea would love to have us strategically. So we have to find a way to protect ourselves. And we're finding out that the military said, well, you guys are on your own, the civilians. If there's an airstrike that comes this way, we will notify our members. And this came directly from an admiral telling me this. If there's an airstrike, or if there's an airstrike on, let's say, Taiwan or somewhere nearby, are you going to let us know, or are you just going to do what happened last time during the last war where they packed up all their militaries on their C-130s and took off and left us behind? Now, it is our responsible. We are responsible. Homeland Security is supposed to do a whole lot more for us. There's a thing called IPAWS, which is being used in Hawaii. We remember that incident where they actually said an airstrike was coming. Well, they since then corrected those issues and technology that is added to more accuracy on warning systems. Guam doesn't have anything but a siren, and I can tell you right now, if that siren goes off and you're in the aircon or in some building with the air, you're not going to hear anything. So, Leland, what can we do to protect the civilians on this island, and cover ourselves? And it was brought up about shelters. Senator Paris brought that up. Bunkers that are being done. I've seen some bunkers in Harmon that were there, but what can we do, the government?
I think that the government of Guam has to make the case that there's got to be infrastructure for the civilian community. That's one thing. I should also say that, I'm not anticipating a conflict next week or next year. I don't think either the U.S. or China want to go to war. I'm not sure that China is actually looking to conquer Guam or North Korea is looking to conquer Guam. If they have their eyes on Guam, it's because of the threat that Guam poses to them. So we're sort of stuck in the middle. We're in a bad place. It's the threat that is posed from Guam that makes Guam a target. And if that's the case, then I think that really the onus is really on the military to step up and provide security for us. The government of Guam has to make that case strongly. And we can't continue on this track where the military only thinks about their worst case scenario and spends billions for missiles and nothing for shelters. That simply doesn't make sense. That's got to come from here. So we've got to hold them accountable. There's got to be a structured basis to approach this, and then hold their feet to the fire and get it funded. I mean, nobody wants conflict, obviously. And I don't think the U.S. wants conflict with China, and I don't think China wants conflict with the United States. The problem is not, people deciding we're going to go to war like the case recently in Iran. The problem is over misunderstandings, triggers that happen that cause people to accidentally go into conflict, I think is the biggest concern. And, the more people, get in this regional cockfight that we're seeing around, who's got the military. The Chinese are clearly showing they intend to come into the Philippine Sea. That's the kind of environment that escalates the possibility of misunderstandings and accidental conflict. That's really, I think, the largest risk for us, not someone coming to conquer Guam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me. I tend to agree with Leland. I don't know if it's a scenario of China or North Korea coming to take over Guam. I think we're posing a threat, and a wartime footing, they would just eliminate the threat, right? Which again, begs the question about the shelters. Leland, you and I sat together in a forum in 2023 at the University of Guam, and I specifically asked I forget the rank of he was a high muckety muck. I asked him who was responsible for providing the shelters for the civilian population, and he said, we were, which I thought was, ridiculous because we're not responsible for the reason why we need the shelters in the first place. But Major General Esther Agagi, the governor's special assistant for Homeland Security at the time, she wasn't there, but she submitted a pre-recorded video statement. And she said, in the event of an imminent missile attack, local buildings, which are built to withstand winds over 175 miles an hour, would be the first shelter for members of the community. And she went on to say, Guam has some of the highest building codes in the nation.
So I think obviously, if you have 10 minutes, sheltering in place is probably a good idea. But having said that, the islands way off Okinawa, Yonaguni, for example, from the southern part of the Okinawa chain, the Japanese government is building shelters there. It's 6 foot of reinforced cement. That's the kind of shelters they're building. And that's not for nuclear weapons. That's what they're planning in terms of, the potential strikes. I remember that 2023 meeting we're at. I think the captain first said, we don't do shelters in North Dakota. We don't do shelters in Wyoming. So we don't do shelters in Guam. That's up to you. He's right. They don't do shelters in North Dakota. But then again, North Dakota's a pretty big place. Guam is a pretty small place, and I think the impact on our community is different. And let me just give you the example. The proposal to put offensive missiles in Guam, let's say at the top end, there's 300 missiles that can reach China that are stationed in Guam. 300 missiles from Guam at China is not going to change China's calculus about going to war with the United States if that's what they decide they're going to do. China is 6 times bigger than Iran. We've just seen the limited effect that missiles can have on a place like Iran. So 300 missiles from Guam is not going to, they're going to think about it, but it's not going to change their calculus. But what China might lever to eliminate 300 missiles in Guam is a huge issue for us. A huge issue.
Yeah, and I think,
as well as drones, too.
Right. So he mentioned Iran, and the trouble the United States is having in this conflict with Iran, as Iran has responded with asymmetrical warfare. And in the event of any conflict with China, it's going to be very symmetrical. And I don't think our concern is going to be a little drone making it through the quote-unquote missile defense system. It's going to be the Guam killer missile. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I'm very concerned about the drone scenario because it just doesn't come in through air. It can also, they have underwater drones now that they're looking into, and bettering that technology to strike without being noticed. So go ahead. I know, Maneka, go ahead.
Oh no, they don't even have to send a nuclear bomb. They could shoot one of the nuclear reactors instead. And then we
just take a small drone and drop it on it.
We don't even need the Guam killer. We'll have a lot of nuclear reactors for targets if that should happen.
Absolutely. Senator Pierce, do you have any additional? Okay. Well, there was a lot discussed here. You had a wealth of information. Everyone, Baltazar, thank you. I'm looking forward to just really having your testimony so that we can incorporate some of the recommendations that you have. We're not here today to we know the issue, complaint. We are just trying to be the voice to wake everybody up right now that this is a huge issue. And like Leland said, we don't think there's going to be anything happening in the next 3 or 4 years, but it does put a lot of uneasiness to our population here, our community here. People are literally, every time they read the paper about something like, especially with the Washington Times, they're thinking, okay, that's it. Okay, pack up everybody. We're leaving. We're going to go. We don't need this stress. Now they're bringing the strike missiles. People are leaving. We need to ensure that we need to give that confidence that our island is going to be safe for us, no matter what, no matter where you go in the world, because we know that cybersecurity is one of the biggest issues. It's not just the strike scenario, but cybersecurity is probably what most people have said is the way it's going to go if they're going to attack the U.S. through cyber. That means shutting off our water, our power, the infrastructure, all going down. But we still have to be prepared. I know, Dr. Underwood, you wanted to say anything, or? Okay, so that being said, before I do my closing, I want you to know that I do plan on having another informational briefing because, as you said, change happens so quickly all the time that we need to keep our public abreast with information. And I'm hoping that with these informational hearings that it would ease their mind knowing what's going on and what we're doing to protect it. So that being said, and there are no more questions on your end? Okay. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I would like to also mention that it was very disappointing again that the military or any representative did not show up on May 4th, and that I will incorporate the next hearing to include Congressman Moylan to come and invite him and his staff to come and provide some information to us as well, and I, again, invite you. So, again, Dr. Underwood, Leland Bellis, Monica, and Baltazar, thank you. And those who are, of course, I'd like to recognize Melvin Wampat, who's been in the audience listening very carefully to this, and I appreciate you being here too as well. So my office will continue to receive any written testimonies from the public and on this informational hearing. And they can email that to Senator Telo@gmail.com, or you can mail it to my office at 238 Archbishop Flores Street, Suite 407 of the DNA building. So I'd like to, again, thank you, everyone, and create a great weekend. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you. And the time now is 4:20. Thank you.